so I will do a very kind of quick introduction to what we call poetry and power in data dialogues. Our project is mainly focused to fight intoxication, to fight these huge amounts of data that we are totally surrounded. Things like the way we consume the news. Asteroid could fly 8,600 kilometers from Earth in 2026. The cost of corruption in Europe up to 990 billion lost annually. Our brains are not really wired to understand the numbers behind these realities, really. We cannot understand it. And whenever we talk about things such as important as human lives, this is more important than ever, to really understand what is hidden behind these numbers from a more human dimension or a more complex one, like climate change, right? So we say that the way we express information today, somehow, because how it's deployed to us in the news, it creates this huge lack of empathy. We don't connect. And you can see that from platforms like Facebook or Instagram, when you start scrolling and you see a video of a barbecue of your friends, and then you see, oh, an earthquake in Nepal where 200 people are found dead, and then a video of a kitten, right? And these three things are at the same hierarchic level, right? And this have no sense. It's like this connects us to the realities that are hidden behind. We have been deliberate information in there, but we are not like really connected to it. Like the platforms are showing this information in a way that we see them through a window that is like the others, the rest. Is not like really something that we have to care of. And what comes with a lack of empathy is sometimes like even more dangerous, that is a lack of action. If I don't care about something, why I should do something to change it, right? And this happens a lot in like European democracies, where we feel very comfortable with certain realities because we don't feel that they affect us, right? So the concept is empathy so important for data in a bigger scale, and we had a very great example on the last years in the States, where you could see like realities like this one. This was an interview on the Trump advisor Michael Cohen at the CNN, and the anchorman of the CNN asked him about specific information. They said, you have been kind of lying on the data that you were showing to the audience. You were saying that during the Obama years, violence in the United States were rising, and they showed this information panel. They showed like how actually through the Obama years it had been declining, but they were kind of saying that it had risen. And this was an experiment that The Guardian did a year after. And what they asked to the people, they didn't show this part of the graph. They asked the people to just draw it. And what happened was this, right? People thought that the violence was like on increase. And this was important because actually Michael Cohen in the same interview said, well, I was not actually talking about the reality. I was not talking about the true facts. I was talking about how people feel in America. And today in America, people feel that the situation is more dangerous, right? So like the truth is not any more important. This was like published the next day at the New Yorker, and you can see in this kind of sketch contest that it's called Facts Don't Matter, and the anchorman says, I'm sorry, Jenny, your answer was correct, but Kevin shouted his incorrect answer over yours, so he gets the points, right? Somehow it's telling the data is not any more important. What is important is how we feel about the data, right? And we have seen that from a very long time. Like today, when people go to elections and referendums, you are not asked, what do you think, but instead, what do you feel? And that's one of the main dangers of democracy, understanding that the critical mass that votes is moved by emotions, and these are easily manipulated by people, right? So whenever we talk about like such a complex and global issues like climate change and the realities that are hidden behind them, that are like pretty much complex and affects us in a very interconnected way, the way we have to explain these situations have to be different to the ways we have been doing so far. And for a very long time, like people like Guspeth, that was one of the principal advisors of the United Nations Secretary General for Environmental Changes, He said, well, he was working for science for more than 10 years, and he said, I used to think that the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address those problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. Again, what he's saying is, we have the tools, we have the data, we have the facts, we have the technology even, but the people want to do it, don't want to make this change, don't want to move it. And really, to make this change, it comes with something bigger than data, and it's about not thinking on the technical aspects of information only, but also thinking on the social transformation that is needed to accompany these facts and these realities, right? Well, there is this sentence that is generally attributed to Joseph Stalin, even if I have heard that it was from one of his generals. In any case, both of them were very kind of experts on killing people, and they said, one death is a tragedy, a million deaths is just a statistic, right? This is a word or a sentence that we have heard so many times. Saul Alinsky, a political expert in Chicago on the 50s, he said, whenever you go to a demonstration, only 3 people can be killed in the Latino and Black movements. Why? Because the newspaper will only place 3 names. After 3 names, there will be just figures, and that's not human. Like, people don't care about figures. People care about the specific persons, right? And for quite a long time, I thought that was a reality, and that was something that we could not jump over it. And it was not until a few years ago I had a kind of experience in Birkenau, Auschwitz. As most of you will know, there is this concentration camp that is kind of a museum, and whenever I went there, it was quite impacting for me because obviously, I don't know, like the feeling in there is oppressive, but what is more like unexpected for me was to see like even almost 200 kids under 8 years old in silence. Like really, because the feeling of it. And when I was there, I was like quite impressed for like the construction and how they have explained parts of the information. But what really impacted me the most was definitely this room. This is a room that is filled up with human hair of the thousands of victims, the last thousands of victims. And well, the Germans used to like keep this human hair, cut it before killing them. And use it as like factory material for fabric. And whenever the Allies arrived, they said, well, like these material numbers like actually cope much more than the numbers that we have in the list. And we should keep this to actually explain what has happened here. And when I was there, I forget about all the lectures, all the history books, all the films that I have shown before, because this was actually like real numbers. I could like relate this to myself. And this was probably like a very impactful point for me to understand why it's so important in the materiality of information and the way we express information, right? And we don't have to go to such a tragic event and tragic information to explain information in such a way. Examples like this can be seen all over the place. This is Pantà de Sau. For the ones that are not familiar with it, this is a lake created by a dam in Catalonia. And when I was a kid, I used to pass by when I was going to Barcelona with my parents, with the car. And every time I would take my head out of the window to check out on the lake, because you could read the kind of the weather forecast and what had been happening lately. And the particularity of this is that, like, obviously for a kid of 7-year-old, I was not interested in this kind of maps, but I was interested in something more particular, that is, in this lake you have like this church, and depending on the moment of the year and the rains, it gets covered by water or emerges again. And somehow it was a very simple way to express information. It was a simple way for a kid, even for me at that age, to understand the importance of like the materiality, of the reality that it was hidden behind. It was a building, it was tall, it was filled of water. Then I could understand that it was, it had been raining a lot. And So much that even like Thomas Molina, that is like the weather forecast man, a very loved person in Catalonia, use this sometimes to express information in the national TV, right? So it has become even a symbol for Catalans to understand how the situation is. And after like some years of reading a lot about how to disseminate information, I came up with Richard Saul Wurman, that was one of the inventors of the term information architecture, so one of the founders of TED Talks, and he said, we only truly understand something when we can relate it to something we already understand. And that's kind of the magic of using metaphors, kind of the magic of using arts, of instrumentalizing design. And in that direction, I will show you some examples of this. This is a project we did for the Center of Contemporary Culture in Barcelona. And it was a very kind of artistic and art experiment. We were asked by the curators of the museum to quantify the impact of different artworks on the audience of the museum. So the first thing we said is, well, this is impossible because you cannot quantify the impact of an artwork on people because it's very subjective. Art by itself is subjective, and it really depends on the background of people that is looking at it. But we said, okay, what we can do is track the amount of time that people spent in front of these artworks. And that's exactly what we did. We placed different Kinect cameras. This was 2015. And we started tracking the amount of time that people spent in front of one or the artworks or the other, right? And with that, we had like all kinds of information, like the flow of the people in the space. We could actually point out different flows in the exhibition, in the way they have designed the exhibition and so on. But this was not like properly interesting for us. Like this was like classic thing. What we wanted to see is which was the impact that this information could have on the audience, right? What will happen if the audience themselves saw their own data and we actually open this data to everyone? And that's exactly what we did. At the very end of the exhibition, we created, using the metaphor of time, 5 different sand clocks. And these 5 machines will get the data from the Kinect cameras, and on real time, whenever you spend a second in front of these artworks, a grain of sand will fall into his respective data clock, right? So at the very end of the exhibition, you will find this kind of infographic made of sand, where you will see like the differences between one artwork and the other. It was interesting because when they got here, most of the people wanted to come back and see again some of the artworks, understanding that there was one that was like really much like a winner somehow. No? And I remember a situation, a very odd situation that happened, that I was just making a tour with my parents, and like during the tour I saw a guy like that was very serious, like looking one of the artworks, pass by. And after like an hour almost, I came again with some friends for another tour, and I saw the guy in the same place, like looking at the artwork. And I tell him, "Are you okay? You need something?" He said, "No. I'm just giving my time to the artwork because I really think that it's worth it, right?" And somehow I realized that he had kind of personalized and he has humanized this object that was an artwork to give his time, because he was feeling sorry about this artwork because no one else was giving the time, right? And I thought, well, if these kind of experiences and changes on behavior of people happen just by making visible something that was already there, that was the flow of people, but making an aggregate and making it visible to everyone, what could happen if we do it in different places, right? And through these last 8 years of work at Domestic Data Streamers, we have been like kind of tracking spaces where data was being manifested in different ways. These 2 guys, we met them in Venice Beach in Los Angeles. There was a queue of people that were giving them money, but they were not asking for money, actually. They were asking which religion cares most about the homeless people, right? And you could see there like kind of a data visualization, but in a way that was very, again, open to a conversation. They were using humor in this case. They were using kind of a scale of something that was more interactive. And the data itself was not important, was the fact that you were being part of that reality, right? And through like these years, we have been trying to really recreate experiments like this. This one, for example, was an opportunity that we got to create an installation in a prison. And it was a very important prison in Barcelona. It's next to the city center. And it's very particular because it's symbolic. It has a very symbolic value because there were a lot of political prisoners in there during the dictatorship. And it's also in the middle of the city. That is a very odd thing for a prison. And it was closed almost 4 years ago. And right after, we had this opportunity to enter inside. And it was still quite like this, you could still see everything, how it was. You could still read on the walls, only God will judge me, or you could actually still feel the contention of this place and the reality that was hidden in these walls. And what we thought was that this was probably the best context and environment to ask about things like moral questions and justice, which were the limits between these two lines, right? So we created this installation that, again, was very physical, and we were asking people to get stones from one place and place them in different parts of a scale. And you will have in each of the cells one scale asking you different questions, and we were making questions like an innocent person in prison or 10 guilty people on the street, right? These were the real data that we got in 1 day and a half. And somehow when you were in front of this question, I don't know, what do you think? Who will vote for one innocent imprisoned? Please raise your hands. No one? Really? Okay, that's perfect. Actually, that's the presumption of innocence, and that's mainly in most of the legal policies in all the countries in Europe, right? But then we were asking things like, would you condemn someone that has committed a crime if you have the certainty that they will never do it again, right? In this case, someone will do it, yes? Okay, one person there, two over there. Oh, okay. So in this case, we were asking which is the role of prisons in the cities and which are the role of these institutions, because at the very end you are asking if you understand the prison as a space where you have to punish people or as a space to make people go back to society in a productive way, right? And all these questions had this kind of background behind it and had an actual answer by the penal code in Spain, right? So you will be exposed to these questions, you will vote, position yourself, have a discussion, and afterwards, when you turn, you will see what the penal code in Spain said about this specific question, right? And that was kind of an experimental way of creating these spaces of debate, these spaces of discussion, right? It really turns out to this concept that we systematically overestimate the value of access to information and underestimate the value of access to each other. In terms of, most of the times, we see data as this kind of raw material that can be very productive, but we don't understand that most of this material is created by people and is representing people, and it have a political value and moral and ethical value to most of these people, right? And on that direction, another example that we find through the way was this more connected to the way we create cities or design cities was the Michigan State University. So their case is really amazing. What they did, they built the whole campus, but they just didn't create any path. They just fill it up with grass and waited for the people to walk through it, right? And it was by the walk of people that you could start seeing this path that were created by them, and then after 1 year and seeing all the things that have been natural paths and that they have been building, they started building properly with concrete, right? And it was a way to both visualize information, ask for the better way to move from one place to the other, and then don't impose a design perspective or an architectural or urbanistic perspective, but it was a simple way of asking people what they think we should do, right? This has a lot to do with the way we normally like work on design. Like we tend to like have these rules, and urbanism, for example, works a lot in that direction, where like we know which is the best way, the most optimal way, but then people do whatever they want, right? And when a lot of people do whatever they want, like we start seeing patterns, and it's in these patterns that we can like really learn a lot. I will show you like two last examples. One of these is commercial, and the other one is more like institutional. And this was on research. This was a project done for two of the biggest Spanish festivals in Spain, in collaboration with spirits brand Beefeater. And in this case, we wanted to understand how 80s and 90s generation experience music festivals, and which are the spaces where we could actually do a lot more, right? So the first thing we realized is obviously like these places are spaces of fun, are spaces where people really don't want to be annoyed with questions. And we start thinking, okay, what should we do? Like which will be the best way to actually ask questions and when it starts the experience of a festival? And we realized that the most important moment at the very beginning is when people can come to the festivals very organized, right? And it's because they have like their own lineup. They know which people at what point, at which stage they will be. And we said, okay, let's kind of create an application that will ask people about their lineup, because none of these two festivals had it. So we created this very simple web app where you will be asking questions, very silly ones sometimes. Others were about behavior, and another ones were about music. And at the very end, we were creating like this kind of Tinder app to find your perfect lineup, the perfect lineup for your artist. And we didn't only have this, we also had like the outcome of this, that was exactly knowing how many people were gonna come to each of the stages at every time. And this was something that not even the festivals had this information. So unexpectedly, like both festivals were really interested in gathering this information, obviously in real time. And after that, we started like kind of like tracking a more qualitative information in the festival, and having like interviews and more observation in them, as well as creating like what we call the data gates. So these data gates were created to understand which are like the kind of topics that people want to talk in festivals. And how they work is they are placed in natural pathways between different stages in the festival. So the people will decide to go one way or the other. And again, the questions are very silly. Leonardo DiCaprio or Leonardo da Vinci, Gandalf or Dumbledore, I'm looking for the love of tonight, or I'm looking for the love of my life. That was a very discussed one, because you could see like 10 guys at the back of it just like trying to see who was gonna pass through one door or the other. But again, it was a way to visualize information, and it was interesting to see like how people reacted and how there were certain topics that were really triggering a lot of people. And the same, as you can see here, we were kind of using the same how you call it, like the same materials and the same kind of look and feel that you find in a festival. It was not kind of an alien thing being placed there. It was something that felt natural in a music festival. And in the same way, we created like what we call the data walkers, that are these guys that go with a jetpack, like if they were selling beer in a festival and they were exchanging high fives. So they had like these two hands, and depending on the hand that you were high-fiving, you were collecting one data or the other, right? Again, what was important here was not the answers. What was important was understanding that whenever we talk about football in music festivals, it doesn't work. It is not interesting. Whenever we talk about sex, it is interesting. Whenever we talk about certain topics, it really triggers a lot of discussion, right? Obviously, that was very interesting for all the universities involved. We created this book that is called Ebinography, and it's like the academic part of it, of all the research we did, with all the interviews, all the qualitative and quantitative information, and somehow is the red book of festivals that we introduced into Spain, to see which are the spaces that can be really used in different ways and that have like very low cost to really improve. And because we wanted everything to be like super transparent, we created like an open data portal that was, dear festival goers, we know you better than your mothers. So here you have all the information that we gathered of you, and it's open for you to use it in so many ways, right? So this was kind of a commercial application on how information collection and information design can really like trigger total different contexts, no? And in this case, it came from a different direction. We were a bit surprised because we went to the New York Times for talk, and after talk, the main the person in charge of the data division of UNICEF in Department of United Nations came to us and said, hey, we have a big problem, we don't know how to communicate, and it's the lack of information. So whenever we talk about childhood and information in sub-Saharan countries and part of Asia, we don't have information. And this is a huge issue because during the General Assembly that happens in this room, you may have seen sometimes, there are 371 heads of state and ambassadors that come there and have to decide the future for the country somehow. Like have to present their plans to improve, right, and to get closer to the Sustainable Development Goals. But if you don't have information on this, like how you know that you are improving, right? So UNICEF were saying, okay, whenever we ask about childhood and health or childhood and education to some countries, they don't give us answers, and this is even worse than doing it worse, because we don't know exactly what's going on in there. So the main concept that we needed to visualize was very challenging because we had to visualize the lack of information, the non-information, the emptiness, the zero. And by itself, it obviously was complex. And the client itself was very complex. This was in 2016. So still 15 or, yeah, 16, I guess. And still Obama was in power. So our target audience was Obama, was Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General, were like heads of state. And as you can imagine, heads of state have this very like low attention to specific topics whenever you come to like these places. They are surrounded by journalists, by advisors, by lawyers all the time, and security and so on. And this gets kind of a moment of circus somehow. And we said, okay, we have to do something at the same level of surrealism of this of this brief. And we decided that the best way was to create what we call a time machine. Right? So if we were talking about childhoods, we really had to bring all these people to their own childhoods and understand why collecting information on childhoods were important for the future. Right? And whenever we say that to the director of UNICEF, that at this time was a Republican, very conservative one, he told us, no, there is no way you are going to bring a time machine to the United Nations, and we are not going to place Obama inside the time machine. And we had to make this video to really convince him that this was a good idea.
For a long time, humans have been grappling with the idea of time travel. The goal of traveling to the past or the future has always challenged mankind to push the boundaries of technology and science. For the first time now, we have managed to create the technology that enables it. Today we present the world's first working time machine, the only machine that allows you to travel to the present, the most important time we face. A machine activated through your heartbeat that will take you through a journey, asking questions about your childhood, your fears, memories, and dreams. A machine that enables you to be a child again. The time machine will transform all your childhood information into the song of your commitment, a song specifically made for you. All the songs created will form part of the commitment playlist, an album where there will be as many variations of it as there are childhoods. The machine will print a personalized commitment contract between yourself and yourself as a child. This contract will be part of the first commitment contract exhibition, an exhibition that will publicly show people's promises to better the future for children worldwide.
So after showing this video, he said, okay, let's bring the time machine to the United Nations. And we actually built it there in New Jersey and brought it to the United Nations General Assembly. This is how it looked. It was like this kind of mirrored box within like the Le Corbusier building, right in the hall, right before the room where all these decisions were going to take place. And we created it so it was enough small so only one person will enter inside. And this was specifically designed so there will be no interference of other people. So they will be really alone and focused for 7 to 12 minutes. We had in the agenda over 220 heads of governments to go through the time machine. And we designed the whole experience so it could be quick, but somehow like within this time frame of 15 minutes. And the thing is that whenever you came in, you will find first a sensor and a voice will appear and it will ask you to place your hand in the lead surface and it will take your heartbeat. The heartbeat will be then used to make the beat of the song. And from there you will be asked different questions like what you wanted to be when you grow up. For example, Obama said, I wanted to be an astronaut, and you could hear in his song 3, 2, 1, ignition, right? Things like which was your first love, like the first person you love. And we were using the time that you spent before answering that question to use as the second tempo, right? So everything you were answering, every piece of data of your childhood was then transformed into song. And there was like this moment of momentum where all the instruments were playing together. And then there was this voice that was saying, okay, you have heard the sound of your childhood, but still today there are a lot of childhoods that are in silence, and it's in your hands to change that. And because we don't want it to be just a circus, we created this printed contract that was printed with all their data in real time. And it said Obama, President of the United States, and then Obama's a kid, that his first love was Marie, and he wanted to be an astronaut, and he had to sing it for both parts. So it was a commitment with themselves, but somehow we created this exhibition that was open to everyone, to the press, so they could also be accountable of these realities about this commitment. And they were mainly explaining that they have to commit to change specifically this lack of information in childhood, right? It was introduced by Ban Ki-moon, probably one of the most surreal moments in my life. And we got to meet really interesting people that passed by. Some of them just came out crying. Some of them were not impacted at all. But it was really interesting to see how some of these people that normally we think of them as people that are really disconnected to reality were really moved by an experience, an artistic experience like this, right? So just to end up and sum it here, whenever we talk about data today, we can see how all the big magazines are talking about big data, and the power of data, the new God. Even we have now Netflix series talking about information and how we actually understand it in a different way, right? But whenever we talk about the way this information and this data will have consequences on the future, I think we should also check and look up for the reference in the history. And whenever we have something that has transcended as a narrative, as a global narrative, and we look at literature or arts or the cinema, or even probably some of the most impactful moments that have transcended, all of them have transcended not for how what they were, but how they were explained to us, really, which was the narrative behind these realities. And today, somehow, we believe that we have this blank page. There is not a lot of work done in this field and still a lot to do. And as Ludwig Wittgenstein said, the limits of my language means the limits of my world. We believe data is a new language and it should be learned for everyone. And that's all. Thank you very much.